The cell was dark, cold, and smelled of rust and blood. Metal chains hung from the ceiling, their ends locked around a thin figure curled up on the floor. Her skin, once bright and full of life, was pale now, marked with scars that told stories of pain. She had been here for 13 long years, and every single day had been a war for survival. They called her Lyra, though most guards just spat out slave or thing whenever they passed by. The alien baron who owned her liked to say she was his trophy, a reminder of a victory long ago. But to Lyra, it was just a curse that had stolen her freedom and her hope. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway. She lifted her head slightly, just enough to see a shadow stretch across the bars of her cell. The baron stepped in, his tall frame blocking the dim light, his eyes filled with cold amusement. Behind him stood 2 guards and someone else, a human, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in simple travel gear. His eyes scanned the room slowly until they landed on her, and for a moment his face changed, not with disgust like the others, but with something strange, pity maybe, or even anger. "This one?" The baron laughed, his voice like gravel. "She's been here for over a decade. Human, she's broken." The human didn't reply right away. He just looked at Lyra, his gaze steady, almost as if he was trying to read her soul. Lyra looked away, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing her weakness. The baron tapped the bars with his cane. "She's not worth anything now. Her spirit's gone, her body's ruined. But if you want her, I can be generous." One of the guards chuckled. "Generous enough to let you take the problem off our hands." The human still didn't answer. Instead, he crouched slightly, looking at Lyra again. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. Lyra's lips trembled. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him to leave, but her voice had long been broken by years of silence. "She can't," the baron said, smirking. "Not without help, not without chains." The human straightened, his jaw tight. He turned to the baron. "What's your price?" The baron's smirk widened. He hadn't expected the human to actually want her. "Oh, more than she's worth, friend. But if you've got the credits, she's yours." Lyra's heart pounded. She didn't understand. No one ever tried to take her, not like this. Most who looked at her saw a waste of space, a reminder of failure. But this human, his eyes said something different. After a short exchange, the human handed over a small metal case. The baron opened it, counted the credits inside, and grinned. "Pleasure doing business," he said mockingly. "She's all yours, though. I can't imagine why." The guards unlocked the chains, and for the first time in 13 years, Lyra's wrists were free. The heavy metal cuffs fell to the floor with a loud clink, and her arms dropped weakly to her sides. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, but she fell forward, straight into the human's arms. He caught her easily, his grip firm but gentle. She could smell something unfamiliar on him, not the stench of cruelty she knew so well, but something clean, without a word. He lifted her and carried her out of the cell. The baron's laughter followed them down the hall like a shadow. "She won't last a week," he called out. "She'd die before you reach your ship." Outside, the alien sky was burning red with the setting suns. Lyra had forgotten what fresh air felt like. Every breath was sharp in her lungs, every sound too loud after years in the damp silence. The human didn't speak as he walked through the busy streets, but his grip never loosened. Even when people stared, whispered, and pointed at the strange sight, a human carrying an alien woman in tattered clothes and broken chains. When they reached the docking bay, Lyra noticed something strange. 2 figures in dark armor stood near the entrance, watching them. Their eyes followed every step the human took. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "They're following us," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. The human didn't look back, but his hands shifted slightly, tightening around her. "I know," he said quietly. "Hold on." As they approached his ship, the armored figures began to move. Slow at first, then faster. The human quickened his pace, his eyes fixed on the open ramp of his vessel. Lyra's pulse quickened. She had dreamed of escape before, but it had always ended in pain. This time, something felt different. She didn't know why, but she believed, just for a moment, that he might actually get her out. The ramp hissed as it closed behind them, sealing them in. The ship's engines roared to life, vibrating under their feet. Through the small viewport, Lyra saw the armored figures break into a run, shouting into their coms. The human sat her gently in a seat, strapped her in, and moved to the controls. As the ship lifted off the ground, he glanced at her, his eyes steady and calm. "You're safe now," he said. Lyra wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this wasn't just another trick, but deep down, a small, fragile hope began to flicker inside her. Something she thought had died long ago. The ship's engines hummed as they cut through the alien skies. Lyra sat in silence, her eyes darting to every corner of the small cockpit, as if expecting guards to burst in at any second. The human pilot kept his focus on the controls, his movements calm and deliberate. He hadn't even asked her name, yet his presence made her feel strangely safer than she had in years. But safety was an illusion. The Baron was not the kind of man to simply let his property go. If the human thought buying her was enough, he was wrong. Lyra knew the Baron's games. He'd sell you the rope just so he could watch you hang with it later. They left the planet's atmosphere, entering the cold black of space. The stars stretched out endlessly, like frozen sparks in a dark ocean. Lyra watched them through the viewport, her chest tightening with the memory of freedom she had once known. But her thoughts were interrupted by the human's voice. "You've been with him a long time," he said softly. She flinched at the question, then nodded, her voice quiet. 13 years. He didn't ask her for details. He didn't press to know what had happened to her before that. Instead, he reached over and activated a holographic panel, bringing up a series of blinking red dots. "They tagged you," he said simply. She frowned. "Tagged?" He pointed at the screen. "Tracking devices, small ones. I found 2 on you already." Her breath caught in her throat. Of course, the Baron wouldn't just let her leave. The human stood and walked to the back of the ship, returning with a small metal case. Inside were delicate tools and a scanner. "Hold still," he instructed, kneeling beside her. Lyra's mind screamed at her to run, to fight, but her body was too weak. She sat still as he carefully ran the scanner over her skin. A faint beeping came from her ankle, a thin silver implant buried beneath the skin. With steady hands he removed it, sealing the small cut with a quick heal spray. The device lay in his palm, no bigger than a grain of rice, but its blinking light was a warning. "They'll be coming," he said quietly, tossing it into a shielded container. Lyra studied him carefully. He wasn't like the other buyers she'd seen before. There was no greed in his eyes, no cruel amusement, only a quiet determination. Finally she asked, "Why did you take me?" His lips pressed into a thin line before he answered, "Because I could." Before she could ask more, a sharp alarm rang through the ship. The sensors lit up. 2 ships were approaching fast. Lyra's heart raced, her hands gripping the seat. "They found us," she whispered. The human flicked switches and adjusted the controls, his voice calm. "Not yet. But they will if we don't move fast." The ships closed in, and a transmission crackled to life. The Baron's voice filled the cabin, dripping with mockery. "Going somewhere, human? You didn't think I'd let you walk away with my property, did you?" The human's jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. Lyra's stomach twisted at the sound of that voice. It was the voice that had haunted her for more than a decade. The Baron continued, "I'll give you one chance. Turn her over, and I might let you live." Lyra's eyes darted to the human, expecting him to consider the offer. Instead, he cut the transmission and pushed the ship into a sudden dive. The stars blurred as the vessel spun, narrowly dodging an incoming blast from one of the pursuing ships. The chase lit up the black of space with bursts of red plasma fire. The human's hands moved quickly, guiding the ship through impossible maneuvers. Lyra clung to her seat, every sharp turn pressing her deeper into the cushions. One of the pursuing ships fell back, hit by debris from an asteroid field they had plunged into, but the second stayed on their tail, relentless. The human activated the comms to a different channel. "Dockmaster," he said into the mic, "I need a quick jump clearance, urgent." A gruff voice replied, "Only if you pay double the standard fee," without hesitation. The human said, "Done," and sent the credits through. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "You just paid them?" He gave her a quick glance. "Sometimes the fastest way out is through your wallet." The docking coordinates appeared on the screen, and the human guided the ship toward a small, hidden station nestled within the asteroids. The pursuing ship hesitated, perhaps unwilling to follow into neutral territory. When they finally docked, Lyra let out a shaky breath. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the shock of still being alive. Inside the station, the air smelled of metal and oil. The human spoke briefly with a station worker, arranging for repairs and supplies. Lyra followed him slowly, her steps unsteady. Everywhere she looked, eyes turned toward her, some curious, some hostile. She lowered her gaze, not wanting attention. They stopped at a small table in a quiet corner. The human leaned forward, his voice low. "The Baron won't stop, not until you're back in his hands or dead." Lyra swallowed hard. "Then why risk it? You could have just left me." His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Because no one should belong to someone else," he said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the station faded into the background for the first time in 13 years. Lyra felt something she thought she'd never feel again. A fragile spark of trust. Asterisk. The small station was quiet after dark. Most of the traders had shut their stalls, and the dim yellow lights gave the corridors a sleepy glow. Lyra sat on a bench inside the human's ship, her knees drawn to her chest. She hadn't slept since they left the Baron's world. Her mind was still trapped in that cold cell, replaying the chains, the voices, the pain. The human, whose name she now knew was Jace, had gone to speak with a mechanic. He promised the repairs would be quick, but Lyra could sense the tension in his movements every time he stepped outside. His eyes swept the area like a soldier watching for enemies. She didn't need to ask why. If the Baron's hunters had tracked them this far, they wouldn't wait until morning. Sure enough, as the station's night cycle began, the air changed. It was a subtle shift, the kind only someone used to danger would notice. Footsteps echoed in the distance, slow and deliberate. Lyra's heart began to pound. She peered through the ship's small window and caught a glimpse of two figures in dark armor moving between the shadows. The same kind that had been watching them before. The docking bay door creaked open. Jace slipped inside, closing it quietly behind him. His eyes locked on hers, and she could see the message there even before he spoke. "They're here," he whispered. Lyra's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the bench. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jace grabbed a small pack from the shelf and slung it over his shoulder. "We leave now." The engines weren't ready. The mechanic had said repairs would take until morning, but Jace had no intention of waiting. He moved quickly to the cockpit, starting the ignition sequence while Lyra stayed frozen in the back. The low hum of the systems coming alive filled the cabin. But then, a sharp metallic clang echoed from outside. Someone was trying to override the docking lock. Lyra's breath came fast and shallow. Jace turned to her. "Strap in," he ordered. She obeyed without question, fumbling with the belt as he powered the thrusters. The bay's outer door was still closed. If they didn't open it in time, they'd be trapped. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. A loud crash came from the rear. The hunters had boarded. Jace cursed under his breath and grabbed a small blaster from the side panel. He tossed another weapon toward Lyra, but she stared at it like it was a snake. I can't," she stammered. "Then stay low," he replied, already moving toward the sound of footsteps. The first hunter appeared in the doorway, armor gleaming under the dim light. He raised his weapon, but Jace fired first, hitting him square in the chest. The man fell with a heavy thud. The second hunter rushed in, and the two clashed in a blur of movement. Lyra ducked her head, covering her ears as blasts and shouts filled the air. When the noise stopped, Jace stood in the doorway, breathing hard. The two hunters lay still on the floor. Without wasting another second, he rushed back to the controls. The docking clamps released with a loud hiss. The bay door began to open, revealing the endless black of space beyond. But just as they began to move, a new shadow appeared, a larger ship hovering outside. Blocking their path, Lyra's stomach dropped. "That's his," she whispered, her voice trembling. The Baron's personal cruiser was massive, its dark hull covered in jagged markings like scars. Jace's hands tightened on the controls. "We're not playing his game," he said firmly. Instead of heading straight out, Jace veered sharply to the side, skimming dangerously close to the station's outer wall. The cruiser tried to follow, but its size made it slower in the tight space. Jace took advantage, weaving between cargo towers and docking arms. The cruiser fired, but the blasts missed by inches. Inside, Lyra clung to her seat, every nerve in her body screaming. They shot past the edge of the station and into open space. The Baron's ship was still behind them, but Jace aimed straight for a nearby asteroid field. Lyra's eyes widened. "That's suicide," she said. Jace gave a faint smile. "Only if you don't know the way." They plunged into the dense field, massive rocks spinning slowly all around them. The cruiser hesitated at the entrance, its size making navigation dangerous. Jace pushed the engines hard, sliding through narrow gaps that seemed impossible to pass. Every close call made Lyra's heart race faster. One wrong move and they'd be smashed to pieces. Finally, after what felt like forever, they emerged on the other side. The scanners showed no sign of pursuit. Jace slowed the ship, his hands finally relaxing on the controls. Lyra let out a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For a moment, the cabin was quiet. Then Lyra spoke softly. "You could have left me back there. It would have been easier." Jace looked at her, his eyes steady. "Easier doesn't mean right," he said. She didn't know how to respond. All she knew was that she had trusted no one for 13 years, and now she was starting to trust him. But deep inside, she also knew this was only the beginning. The Baron wouldn't stop, and if he ever caught them, the punishment would be worse than death. Asterisk, the ship floated quietly through the dark sea of space. The engines hummed softly, their earlier roar replaced by a steady, calming rhythm. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's chair, wrapped in a thin blanket Jace had given her. Her body still ached from years of neglect, but the deeper pain was inside, a constant weight pressing on her chest. It was the first time in 13 years she wasn't in a cell, yet her mind refused to believe she was truly free. Jace worked at the control panel, checking navigation routes and fuel levels. He spoke little, but his movements were precise. Like a man used to dangerous travel, now and then, his eyes flicked toward her, as if making sure she was still there. She noticed it, but didn't say anything. In truth, a part of her was afraid that if she looked away for too long, he might vanish, and she'd wake back in the Baron's chains. The silence was broken by a faint beeping from the ship's console. Jace leaned forward and frowned. "Short-range scanner picked something up," he said. Lyra's heart jumped. "The Baron?" Jace shook his head. "Not him, but someone." He brought the image up on the screen, showing a small distress beacon drifting through space. It pulsed weakly, its signal almost lost in the static. Lyra leaned closer. "It could be a trap," she warned. "It could also be someone who needs help," Jace replied calmly. His tone wasn't reckless, but certain. Lyra looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "You risk too much." They approached the beacon slowly. The source came into view, a small escape pod, its outer shell scorched from re-entry burns. No life signs appeared on the scanner, but Jace still brought it aboard. Inside the pod, they found nothing but a torn data chip and a few bloodstains. Jace studied the chip, sliding it into the reader. A grainy message flickered to life, a frightened voice speaking in a language Lyra recognized. Her eyes widened. "That's from my world," she whispered. The message was short, desperate, and cut off mid-sentence. It spoke of hunters, of a warning, and of the Baron's reach spreading further than they thought. Jace sat back, deep in thought. If this is true, the Baron has allies in places we didn't expect, he said. Lyra gripped the blanket tighter. Then we can't stay in one place for long, she murmured. Jace nodded, already plotting a new course. The journey ahead would be long, and the ship wasn't in perfect shape. Jace moved to the storage compartment, pulling out ration packs. He handed one to her, but she stared at it suspiciously. "Food doesn't come without a price," she said quietly. Jace met her gaze. "This one does." After a pause, she took it, eating slowly, each bite feeling strange after years of half-spoiled prison rations. Later, Jace began repairing a loose wiring panel. Lyra watched him from the side, studying the way his hands worked with quiet skill. "You're not a traitor," she said finally. He glanced at her. "No." She waited for more, but he didn't offer it. Still, she could see in his eyes. He was someone who had seen war, someone who had lost things too. Hours passed, and the stars outside shifted as the ship crossed into another sector. Lyra's eyelids grew heavy, but she forced herself to stay awake. When she finally drifted off, it was the hum of the engines and the faint warmth of safety that pulled her into sleep. Her dreams, however, weren't peaceful. She saw the Baron's face, heard the crack of the whip, felt the chains around her wrists again. She woke with a sharp gasp, her chest tight. Jace was there instantly, crouching beside her. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're here, not there." She nodded. Though her hands were still trembling, for the next few days, they stayed on the move. They stopped briefly at a small asteroid market for fuel. Lyra stayed hidden in the ship, peering out through a narrow viewport. Every shadow felt like a threat, every voice like it could belong to one of the Baron's men. One evening, as they traveled through an uncharted system, the warning alarm blared. Jace checked the scanner. A ship was following them. Not large enough to be the Baron's cruiser, but armed. "They found us," Lyra whispered. Jace adjusted their course, keeping calm. "Then we make sure they can't keep up." The next hour was a tense game of pursuit and evasion. Jace used asteroid belts, gravity wells, and even the shadow of a small moon to shake them. Finally, the pursuing ship vanished from the scanner. Lyra exhaled slowly. "How do you always know where to go?" He gave a faint smile. "You learn when you've spent your life running from someone." When they were finally alone again, Jace set the ship on autopilot and sat across from her. "You should know something," he said quietly. Lyra tilted her head, unsure. "I can get you to safety, but only if you want it." Her brows furrowed. "Why would I not want safety?" Jace looked at her seriously. "Because safety means staying hidden forever. And I think a part of you wants more than that." She didn't answer right away. She thought about the years she had lost, the people she had never seen again. Maybe he was right. Maybe freedom wasn't just about running. Maybe it was about deciding where to stand. But deep inside, Lyra knew one thing for certain. The fragile journey they were on was only the beginning, and sooner or later, the Baron's shadow would find them again. Asterisk. The ship glided through the black of space, its hull bearing fresh scratches from the last encounter. Fuel levels were low, and Jace knew they couldn't keep flying forever without rest. The nearest safe human colony was too far, so he made a decision that even he didn't like. They would hide in one of the lawless freeports, places where no one asked questions. But everyone had a price. Lyra sat silently in the co-pilot's chair as the freeport came into view. It was a massive floating structure built from scraps of old ships, spinning slowly in the void. Dim lights flickered across its surface, like the glow of a dying city. From a distance, it looked abandoned. But Jace knew better. Inside, it was full of traitors, mercenaries, and criminals from 100 worlds. "Stay close to me," Jace said as they docked. Lyra nodded, pulling her hood over her head. Her time with the Baron had taught her what kind of people thrived in such places: predators, scavengers, and those who hunted the weak for sport. The docking doors opened with a hiss. The air inside the Freeport was heavy, smelling of oil, smoke, and something burnt. Neon signs blinked overhead in alien languages. Crowds moved through narrow streets made from old ship corridors. The sound of shouting, laughter, and the clatter of machinery filled the air. Jace led her past a gambling den, a weapon stall, and a group of armored bounty hunters laughing around a table. Lyra kept her head low, afraid someone might recognize her. Every time they passed a shadowed corner, she expected the Baron's men to step out. Jace, meanwhile, was scanning the area with calm precision. He was looking for someone, or maybe looking for everyone. They found a small supply shop tucked between two towering engine parts. Inside, the owner was a short alien with 4 arms and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Jace ordered fuel cells, spare filters, and a basic medkit. Lyra stayed near the door, watching the crowd outside. That's when she noticed them, 2 men in dark armor. Standing still in the flow of people, they weren't browsing. They weren't talking. They were watching. Her breath caught. "Jace," she whispered. He glanced at her, then followed her gaze. His expression didn't change, but his voice was firm. "We need to leave now." The shopkeeper grumbled as Jace grabbed the supplies and tossed a handful of credits onto the counter. They stepped back into the street, moving quickly. The armored men began walking too. Matching their pace, the Freeport's maze-like corridors twisted in every direction. Jace led them through a side passage, past flickering lights and rusted bulkheads. "Are they his men?" Lyra asked quietly. "Most likely," Jace replied. "And they won't stop unless we make them." They emerged into a crowded market square. Merchants shouted their prices, customers haggled, and the smell of cooked meat filled the air. Jace slowed, blending them into the crowd, but Lyra could feel eyes on them still. The armored men had split up, one moving along the left side, the other along the right. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from a nearby stall. People shouted as smoke billowed from a broken cooking unit. Jace grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the chaos. They slipped behind a stall and into a maintenance corridor. The dim passage echoed with the hum of old power lines. Jace checked behind them. The men were gone for now. They reached the docking bay and began loading the supplies onto the ship. Lyra was about to breathe a sigh of relief when a metallic clang echoed from above. She looked up. The 2 armored men were standing on the upper walkway. Weapons drawn, Jace moved fast, shoving her behind a cargo crate as blaster fire rained down. Sparks flew as shots hit the metal floor. Jace returned fire, forcing the men to take cover. Lyra's heart pounded. The fight was loud and close. She could hear the shouts of other dock workers scrambling away. One of the armored men jumped down, landing with a heavy thud. Jace met him head-on, their weapons clashing in a storm of movement. The other stayed above, firing from cover. Lyra saw a small maintenance panel near her. It controlled the dock's emergency shutters. Her hands trembled as she crawled to it, prying it open. Inside was a lever covered in dust. She yanked it down. With a grinding roar, the heavy blast. Doors began to close over the dock's opening. The man above shouted into his cums. Realizing their escape route was closing, he fired wildly, but Jace took the chance to knock his opponent to the ground. The armored man rolled, trying to recover, but Jace's final shot sent him sprawling. The second man jumped down, retreating before the doors sealed completely. The dock fell quiet except for the sound of Jace's heavy breathing. He turned to Lyra, his eyes sharp but calm. "Good thinking," he said. She swallowed, still shaking. "I just didn't want them to take me." His gaze softened. "They won't." They loaded the last of the supplies and boarded the ship. As the engines roared to life, Lyra looked back at the Freeport through the viewport. The neon lights were fading. Into the distance, somewhere inside, she knew more hunters were waiting for the right moment. But for now, they had escaped. Jace plotted a course for open space. Neither of them spoke for a while, but Lyra knew this fight had only made one thing clear. The Baron wasn't just chasing her. He was closing in. The stars outside were sharp and cold. The hum of the ship was steady, but the air inside felt heavy. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the endless black. She wanted to believe the danger was behind them, but deep down, she knew the Baron's men didn't give up that easily. Jace was at the controls, his eyes scanning the navigation display. "We'll pass through the Epsilon belt in 2 hours," he said. Lyra didn't know the place, but the way he said it told her it wasn't safe. She shifted in her seat, pulling the blanket tighter. "Why go there?" she asked. "Because no one sane does," Jace replied. "And that's exactly why they might not follow." The ship's comms crackled suddenly. A voice came through, deep, cold, and unmistakable. "The Baron. Running only makes it worse." "Jace," the voice said smoothly. Lyra froze, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "You know what I want, and you know what happens if you don't give it back." The Baron continued. Jace didn't answer. He cut the comms and pushed the ship faster. The silence that followed was thick. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "He's close," Jace nodded. "Too close." Not long after, the sensors lit up. 3 ships were approaching fast. Each bore the jagged markings of the Baron's hunters. "They're going to try to board us," Jace said. Lyra's pulse raced. "Can we outrun them?" He shook his head. "Not here. We fight." The enemy ships surrounded them like wolves closing in on prey. A voice barked through the comms. "Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded." Jace flipped switches, powering up the defense grid. The ship's shields glowed faintly. As blaster fire rained down, Lyra flinched at the sound. The whole vessel shook with each hit. Jace maneuvered hard, skimming between asteroids and using their cover to block enemy fire. One of the hunter ships swung in close, a harpoon-like clamp shot out, latching onto their hull. The metallic screech sent a chill down Lyra's spine. "They're latching on," she shouted. "I see them," Jace replied, already grabbing his blaster. The docking seal hissed, and armored footsteps echoed through the connecting tube. Jace tossed Lyra a small stun pistol. "Only if you have to," he said, before moving toward the entry. She clutched it tightly, her hands trembling. The first hunter burst through the hatch. Jace fired before he could raise his weapon, the blast sending him sprawling. 2 more followed, their armor dark and heavy. Jace ducked behind cover, exchanging rapid fire with them. The air filled with the smell of burning metal. One hunter broke through, charging toward Lyra. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She raised the stun pistol and fired. The shot hit his shoulder, making him stumble. Jace took the opening, knocking him to the ground with a brutal strike. The third hunter hesitated, glancing between them. Then he backed into the hatch and shouted something in his comm. Jace swore under his breath. "They're calling for more." Without wasting time, he slammed the hatch controls. The docking clamp released with a violent jolt, sending the hunter ship spinning back. 2 of the Barons' ships broke formation to recover their men. That left only one on their tail. Jace returned to the cockpit, taking the controls. "They'll regroup fast. We need to end this now," he said. He steered the ship straight toward a cluster of sharp, rotating asteroids. The hunter ship followed, weaving through the deadly field. Lyra's breath caught as they scraped past a massive spinning rock. One wrong move could tear them apart. Jace slowed just enough to make the hunter think they had an opening. The enemy ship closed in for the kill. At the last moment, Jace spun the ship sideways and cut the engines. The hunter couldn't react in time. It slammed into an asteroid, breaking apart in a burst of fire and debris. Silence filled the cockpit, except for the steady hum of the ship. Jace let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Lyra stared at him, her voice low. "You could have left them alive." He shook his head. "Not with the orders they had. They wouldn't have stopped." For a long moment, neither spoke. Lyra felt the weight of what had just happened settle in her chest. She didn't like killing, but she understood it. Here, it was survival. And for the first time, she realized something. The Baron's men feared Jace, not because he was reckless, but because he didn't break under pressure. As they left the asteroid field, Jace adjusted their course. "We're heading to a settlement," he said. "A place you can rest for a while." Lyra wanted to believe that, but she also knew this wasn't over. The Baron had lost today. But he wouldn't stop until he had her again. She sat back in her seat, watching the stars slide past. Her hands still trembled from holding the weapon, but deep inside, a strange feeling grew. It wasn't just relief. It was the start of something she hadn't felt in years, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could fight too. The settlement came into view like a quiet promise in the void. It was small, built on the surface of a green moon that glowed faintly. Under its twin suns, fields stretched out around the landing pads, dotted with simple homes and small gardens. It didn't look like a place where bounty hunters would come. It looked safe. Jace guided the ship down slowly, the landing struts touching the soft soil with a gentle thud. Lyra sat in silence, staring out at the peaceful scene. She had almost forgotten such places could exist, where the air wasn't filled with shouts, chains, or the hum of prison doors. When the hatch opened, a wave of warm, fresh air rolled in. It smelled of flowers and damp earth. Lyra stepped out hesitantly, her bare feet sinking slightly into the grass. It felt strange, almost wrong. After so many years on cold metal floors, a tall human woman approached, her hair streaked with silver, her smile warm. Jace greeted her with a brief hug. "This is Mara," he told Lyra. "She runs the settlement, and owes me more than a few favors." Mara's eyes softened as she looked at Lyra. "You're safe here," she said. "No one will harm you." The words were kind, but Lyra didn't quite believe them yet. Safety was not something she trusted easily. Still, she followed them to a small home at the edge of the fields. It was simple: one room, a soft bed, and a table with fresh food. She stood in the doorway. Afraid to enter, Jace noticed and stepped beside her. "It's yours," he said quietly. "You don't have to earn it or pay for it." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. Every creak of the wooden walls made her tense. She kept expecting to hear the Baron's voice or the sound of armored boots, but the only sounds were the gentle wind and the chirp of night. Insects. At dawn, Mara brought her clothes, clean, soft, and in colors she hadn't seen in years. She changed slowly, staring at herself in the mirror. The scars on her skin stood out against the fabric. She touched them lightly, wondering if they would ever stop feeling like chains. Passed, and Lyra began to learn the rhythm of the settlement. Children played in the fields, traders came and went, and the nights were filled with quiet. Jace stayed close, helping with repairs around the houses and sometimes disappearing into the forest trails. He never told her exactly what he was watching for, but she knew. He was waiting for signs of the Baron's men. One afternoon, while they were sitting outside, Lyra finally asked the question that had been in her mind for days. "Why did you save me?" Jace looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped. And to think no one will come." Lyra lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I stopped believing anyone would." He reached out, placing a hand over hers. "Then believe again," he said that night. A storm rolled over the moon. Rain drummed against the roof, and flashes of lightning lit the small room. Lyra sat on the bed, watching the door, her old fear rising with every gust of wind. When a loud crack of thunder shook the walls, she flinched. Jace, who had been sitting by the table, stood and crossed the room. Without a word, he sat beside her, his presence steady and calm. "You're safe," he said, and this time, she almost believed it. Over the next week, she began to help in the settlement, carrying water, sorting supplies, and sometimes even speaking with the children. It felt strange to be useful in a way that didn't involve orders or punishment. One of the little girls gave her a flower and called her Miss Lyra. It was the first time her name had been spoken with kindness in over a decade, but even as the days grew softer, the shadow of the Baron never left her mind. She would catch herself glancing at the sky, half expecting to see his cruiser one evening. Jace found her standing at the edge of the field, staring into the distance. "He'll come," she said quietly. Jace nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That was when she realized something. She was no longer the same woman who had been dragged in chains. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something new, a will to fight, and she knew that if the Baron came, she wouldn't face him alone. On the night before Jace was due to leave for a short supply run, she stood at the doorway as he prepared his bag. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. "I've been coming back for you since the day I found you," he said, when he stepped closer. She didn't pull away. For the first time in 13 years, she allowed herself to rest her head against someone's chest. His arms came around her, steady and warm. The storm inside her quieted, and in that moment, she knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The Baron's shadow might still be out there, but here, in the human's arms, she had found something the Baron could never take: a new life.